Welcome to the Building Web3 Podcast. Today, my good friend Gandalf, he is the core contributor at Bedrock. Before we get too deep into Bedrock and everything you got going on over there, what led you to this project? How did you get into this world of Web3?
It's actually a bit of an interesting story because I got into Web3 about 8 years ago. I was working at a bank and got involved with some conversations with some of my clients there, and they were investing in the space, and I started to dive into the rabbit hole on my own, just after work, researching and looking into it. And because it was relatively early back then, the majority of the people that I worked with and my friends and colleagues had never heard of any of this. And so I ended up having to do extra research just to be able to share what I was looking into. And I started writing documents for them and articles for them, just simply as a way of sharing that knowledge with them. And as I started doing that, I started to notice that there was a bit of a disconnect between projects and teams that were building and their ability to communicate to the wider public or the general populace. And so I started approaching some of these projects that I was getting heavily involved with from an investor perspective, and offered to do some writing for them. And it really took off. And eventually, after a few months of doing this, one of the projects said that they were actually looking for a full-time technical writer, somebody to help out with the community. And at this point, I was head deep in the space. Every waking moment, I was doing my own research and looking into different projects and different launches, etc. And I decided to take the leap and leave my relatively comfy job at the bank and dive into Web3. And one of the founders of that blockchain project was Juling. And I worked with him in that project for a couple of years before moving on to some of my own projects. I was also writing as a feature journalist and a news journalist for Cointelegraph. Worked with Scott Melker as his editor-in-chief for a little bit, and then ended up advising a number of projects in the NFT space. Got to work with some really interesting teams there, from Steve Aoki, Mike Tyson, Sylvester Stallone, LaMelo Ball, NBA, WWE, Lexus, a whole range of different projects. And while I was in that space, burning myself out essentially because it was a crazy time, Juling approached me and he said that he's putting together a growth team at RockX, which is the team behind Bedrock, and he was wanting to kind of hand pick a group of people to kind of spearhead that team. And so he mentioned who he was looking at, and I'd worked with half of those guys before, and Julian was one of the best bosses I've ever had. And so I didn't take too much convincing, to put it bluntly, and I'd always been eyeing off the DeFi space, and so I decided to leave the NFT industry and move over to the DeFi space and start with RockX. That was about almost 3 years ago now, and I worked in RockX, helping out to build up the staking infrastructure there, and working with partners and the access nodes. Worked with a lot of foundation teams, incubators, etc. And then around a year and a half to 2 years ago, we launched Bedrock, and I started to transition, and now I'm fully involved in the Bedrock team. It takes up all my time. When I'm not sleeping, essentially, I have my phone on me, and I'm always getting involved in some sort of conversation around Bedrock, around UniBDC, UniETH, UniITX, one of our staking products there.
It's quite interesting you essentially started your Web3 career as a tech writer, because if listeners don't know, this is how we fund the entire podcast. Is I do tech writing for companies, and then you transitioned from Grow. So for people that are not too fluent in the technical writing space, talk to them a little bit about like what is technical writing, and then your transition into growth and growth marketing.
Yeah, absolutely. So technical writing is essentially the ability to take technical concepts, products that in the tech space, or the way they're built, the development behind them, some of the infrastructure, some of the strategies used, and the decisions used in how those products are built, and sharing that in layman's terms. So it might be, for example, talking about how you transactions are encrypted, or how they are essentially broken down into hashes with, say, Merkle trees. Um, it might be focusing more on the trading side of things, as far as how leverage trading is meant to be used versus how the majority of people use leverage trading, which increases their risk rather than decreasing their risk. It could be as simple as doing deep dives into where blockchain is developed. One of the most interesting articles I wrote was in 2018, I think, where I basically researched which banks were getting involved in blockchain technology and how. And at the time, which was about 6 years ago now, I had a list of 220 plus banks on that list. And I put out a challenge when I released that article for anybody to try and find a bank that was somewhat well known that was not on that list. And to this date, nobody's been able to complete that challenge. Every single bank that they could think of was on that list, and that was back in 2018. So that was a really interesting one that I focused on. But yeah, it's essentially just developing out how products are built and things that people don't understand, and breaking it down for them in simple ways. And the way I transitioned from there was uh, I started out doing just technical writing, but then as my role expanded, and anyone who's worked in a startup or a smaller company will know that you end up wearing many, many hats over time. I tended to start to build out more campaigns, and then because I was so heavily involved in what the community was understanding and wanting to know, etc., I was able to start feeding that back into the product team and the development team. And then I would, because I was kind of that bridge in between with my technical understanding and then my wider community and marketing understanding, I was able to do product testing, do a little bit of product development, project management, grow out my skills there as well. And again, in the startup space, there's always going to be roles to be filled, and so you can really just, wherever you want to grow, you can focus on that area. And so I've done probably most of the jobs besides being a developer. I've done most of the jobs that you could think of.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, let's talk a little bit now about Bedrock itself, because I'm sure listeners are like, what is this Bedrock?
Yeah, absolutely. So Bedrock was developed as a way of us providing an end-to-end solution for our community and for our investors. So just to kind of take a step back, RockX, which is the team that essentially run the infrastructure and support Bedrock, they've been providing staking infrastructure and access nodes for years for a lot of other staking providers, a lot of other institutional clients and partners in the space. And they run all this on 25 different chains, at least. They've got 2 billion assets under management, and they're seen as kind of the tech powerhouse for other leaders in the space. So Lido, for example, came to us to help build out one of their liquid staking solutions. SSV came to us to help them build out their DKG, which is distributed key generation technology, a way of just managing keys and passphrases in a bit more of a secure manner, rather than having a simple multi-sig where any individual has full access to a wallet. And so we've often been that infrastructure and that man behind the scenes, so to speak. And we wanted to kind of take it the next step and become that end-to-end solution. And that's where we built out Bedrock. And it started out as a liquid staked protocol at first. And we built it out, or we launched it rather, first on Ethereum with the UniETH token. And that was quite successful. Only a few months later, the IATX Foundation approached us saying, hey, we've seen what you've done. We're trying to build out a liquid stake solution on our chain. Can you help us with that? And they said, we're happy for it to be under the Bedrock banner, but we just want something. So we worked with them to build out Uni IOTX, and that again was really, really successful. It ended up being allowing us to become the largest validator set on the IOTX chain, which is bigger than Binance and everybody else. And so that was really encouraging to see that take off. Then at the end of, or near the end of the year, so this is last year, in 2023, near the end of the year, eigenlayers started to come into prominence, and we'd been keeping an eye on the technology there and then the liquid restake space. And we had a decision to make whether we wanted to enter the restaking space, and if we did, do we want to build a second token that would be on top of the underlying UniETH? So you've got liquid staked token here, which is essentially a liquid product that earns the yield for native proof of stake validators on the chain. And then you've got the restaking, which is essentially taking that liquid asset and then putting it on other platforms like Eigenlayer, where there's services that are using that as security as well. And what we decided to do, instead of having these two layers, we decided to combine them into one, and we would shift the UniETH token from an LST into an LRT. And so what that meant was the underlying ETH that was accepted or locked in would become, not only would it be earning the native yield from staking on Ethereum, but it would also be earning the additional yield on Eigenlayer from all the AVSs, which are essentially services or products that are built on top that are using those assets as a way of securing their network. And so we then did that shift. That was a really successful and smooth shift over a couple of months, and we continued to grow from there. And we got to see quite a lot of interest in the space. We didn't aim to become the biggest player. We aimed to be the most secure and the most sustainable. And because of our background in the infrastructure space, it was very, very easy for us to kind of keep that approach, because with us having run infrastructure, we could run everything from all the way back in the infrastructure to the front end as well. And the majority of our clients that we've dealt with in the past are institutional clients, and they have a very, very high level of due diligence. They have a lot higher and more stringent security measures that they need to adhere to. And so as long as we essentially focus on that, we're going to meet all the requirements for all the other types of clients, whether it's retail investors, whether it's degens, VCs, etc. And then a few months later, the Babylon started to get mentioned, and we jumped on that. We'd always been eyeing off and exploring how can we provide some sort of utility where the Bitcoin assets are actually working for the investor, working for the user, because previously it was just a store of value sitting there, not doing anything. And so as soon as Babylon launched, we dived into it, had lots of conversations with the team, got quite close to them. We actually launched UniBDC, which is, or at the time was the first Bitcoin staked asset. We launched that in partnership with Babylon and a few other partners as well. But the key one was Babylon there. So that was around, I think, the end of Q1 this year that we launched that. And when we launched that also made us or rather solidified us as the first and really only true multi-asset restaking provider, because we have UniETH, we have UniITX, and now UniBDC. All of those are underneath the Bedrock banner or the Bedrock protocol. So we launched UniBDC. We developed that out further as far as started to release it on multiple chains. And right now, I think it's on almost a dozen different chains across both the Bitcoin ecosystem. So a lot of the Bitcoin layer 2s like Merlin, B Squared, BitLayer, etc., as well as on the Ethereum ecosystem. So Optimism, Ethereum, Arbitrum, Binance Chain, and two or three others, I think. And so we've been really fortunate in the sense that we've been able to work with a lot of the foundation teams on UniBDC as well. We got a grant to be part of Optimism's Superfest grants program that we were actually asked to put in an application for that. The Arbitrum Foundation have also approached us asking if they can essentially work with us to launch UniBTC on Arbitrum, which a bit of alpha that's coming in about 1 week from now. That'll be the first Bitcoin restaked asset on Arbitrum. So that's going to be very exciting. And a number of other chains, which I just can't mention just now. We're working very closely with the foundations to launch programs that will incentivize the growth in a bit more of an organic manner.
Yeah, it's one reason I love infrastructure companies is they can get grant funding and it really helps with the growth. But I want to take a big leap back because in case there's any newer listeners that are like, hey, okay, I know about proof of stake, but we just mentioned LSTs and LRTs. So let's talk a little bit about proof of stake. So people can stake their ETH and then they can get they usually historically cannot get a token, but if they put it up with someone like Lido, they're able to get a token. So let's just walk through, I like to call this the life of a transaction. So let's walk from the point of people are staking their ETH to how they even get the LRTs.
Yeah, absolutely. So with proof of stake, you've got two parts to it. You've got the validator, which is the technical side, and that's the part that's securing the network, that's essentially doing the heavy lifting and the hard work. And then you've got your stake, which is, in this case, for Ethereum, it's 32 ETH, which is roughly about, $70,000. And that is essentially the skin in the game for the validator. So if the validator does something malicious or something wrong, they lose part or all of that stake. And that's a kind of a way of saying, hey, you've got something to lose. Let's make sure you do the right thing. Now, like you said, that stake is essentially locked and it's very illiquid. It's not only can you not do anything with it, but there is a withdrawal queue. There's a time frame where it takes X amount of time to be able to access those funds again. And if the network is congested and a lot of people are doing withdrawals, that can be as long as weeks or longer, which in a market like the Ethereum or just crypto in general, that is a really big struggle or a pain point for investors. So what projects like Lido and Bedrock do is they essentially say, okay, we know that when the asset is locked away, we know that is essentially locked for X period of time at a minimum because you can't access it before then. What we'll do is we'll give you an IOU. So think of it like it's a term deposit, but instead of you just getting a slip of paper or seeing on the screen that it's a term deposit, you get a token that says whoever holds this token can redeem the staked assets for X amount. So if it's 1 uni ETH, that's going to essentially relate back to 1 ETH that's been staked, plus any rewards that have been accrued on that ETH to date. That's called a non-rebasing token, where the value of the token goes up, the number of tokens don't increase over time based on the rewards. So there are two types. There's rebasing and non-rebasing tokens. Rebasing ones are where as you earn rewards, your balance of tokens go up. So you get 1, 2, 3, 4 over time. Non-rebasing, your number of tokens don't go up, but the value goes up compared to the underlying asset that's redeemed. So you can redeem it for 1 ETH, you can redeem it for 2 ETH, etc. So you, with Bedrock Uni ETH, it's non-rebasing. So that's liquid staked. And then liquid's restaked, like I mentioned earlier, it's essentially where that underlying asset isn't just secured to the validator that's securing the Ethereum network, but it's also then used to secure other services and other platforms, which historically speaking, EigenLayer was the first one that did that. But you've got EigenLayer, you've got Karak, you've got Symbiotic, you've got Babylon. Babylon being the main Bitcoin one, really the only Bitcoin one. And just with saying that, UniBTC is actually the only LRT or liquid restake token that can be used to receive Babylon rewards and EigenLayer rewards. So normally it's Babylon rewards are for your Bitcoin, EigenLayer is for your ETH assets, but with UniBTC, they're accepted on both. And so, well, rather the underlying Bitcoin that you stake with us gets locked away on Babylon, earning those assets, and then UniBTC is accepted on EigenLayer, which then allows you to essentially be doubling, or who knows how many times that yield will be increased. But that's something that's really, really exciting that we've been able to do just recently because of our relationships with these teams.
Yeah, you mentioned multi-asset restaking. So talk to us a little bit about like that concept. And I believe you mentioned you guys are the first or possibly the only to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, I say possibly because, I mean, you never know in this space. There are so many projects that launch in stealth, etc., and I don't want to make a false claim there. As far as I'm aware, we are the only ones that do it in a true sense. And what I'm talking about there is there are different types of LRTs. There's ones that accept the underlying or native ETH, which is Ether, and they run the validator sets. They lock those on, say, EigenLayers, EigenPods, and do the whole infrastructure. But then you've got others that are essentially more like a wrapper. And what they do is they essentially say, okay, all we're going to do is we're going to take, say, Lido's LST token or some other LST and let that underlying platform, whether it's Lido or whoever, to run all the infrastructure, do the validators, do all that native staking on Ethereum. And we're just going to take that staked asset, liquid staked asset, and we're going to just deposit it on EigenLayer, which anybody can do, but we're going to do it for you. And because we're going to do it, we're going to give you another liquid token so that your asset remains liquid. And we will take a cut of those fees. So there's literally no technical work. It's just, like I said, a wrapper. Them saying, okay, well, you can deposit it on EigenLayer and we'll just give you another token. And because that other token is locked or promised back to that underlying liquid staked asset that you put on EigenLayer, it has value. If it wasn't locked to that asset that LRT would be essentially worthless. So there's two types of LRTs, and we do the former, where we run everything from end to end, and we're able to do that again because of our experience, our historical expertise, that we've been able to kind of run that and build that out with our partners. And so, taking that a step further, Bedrock was always designed to be multi-asset, where the Uni token can be developed on any chain that offers staking and restaking. So we've got UniETH, which is essentially running on the Ethereum network. But with saying that, it is launched on half a dozen plus chains. So you can actually access the token. You can get involved in DeFi on Arbitrum, on Ethereum mainnet, on I've just gone blank, but a whole range of different chains there, and they're partners on each of those chains. But then you've got Uni IOTX, which again is on the IOTX chain, and then you've got Uni BTC, which is on talking about wrapped Bitcoin, essentially on Bitcoin's ecosystem. And so the fact that they're multiple staked assets that interact with multiple different ecosystems is where we're talking about as far as that multi-asset restaking.
Mm-hmm. And let's talk about some of the like challenges you guys have faced, because I'm sure it's not particularly easy to do all of this restaking. And talk to us. Is it like grants? Is it marketing? Is it getting like assets onto the platform? Talk to us. What are the challenges were and how you guys overcame them?
Absolutely. So there are actually different challenges based on different assets that we launch, restaked assets. So with Ethereum is a proof of stake chain. What that means is for us to get that native underlying staking yield, the ETH that we receive, or we don't receive, but it gets staked on Bedrock, it has to end up on Ethereum mainnet because it has to be used to run and secure the validator set. Sorry, it has to be used as a way to run those validators on mainnet. What that means is, even if we launch on Arbitrum or Binance Chain or Optimism or Base or wherever, we have to find a way to then have that ETH end up back on mainnet. and that's using bridges and cross-chain messaging and a whole range of different things, and that's very expensive. So that's been one of the big challenges for us, is how to launch on multiple chains while still ensuring that we can capture that underlying native yield for our user base and our investors and community. Because at the end of the day, that's half of what the restaking token is meant to be doing. The next part, the next challenge is as far as the integrations go and ensuring the incentives are provided no matter what platform or project the tokens end up on. So, for example, if we want to provide points, which in Bedrock's case are called diamonds, for anybody who's holding the UniETH or UniBTC token, then we need to make sure that we're tracking those individual users and the amounts that they're holding. Now, on a lot of platforms, they work like vaults, where you deposit your assets into the vault, and it gets pulled together with a whole range of other investors' assets. And so, from a basic level on chain, it looks like it's just one address that's holding all of these assets. Now, we don't want to provide that vault with all of those diamonds, because it's not the vault that's earning the diamonds, it's the individual users that have deposited into that. So then we need to work with that particular project to get some APIs with them integrated into our points tracking mechanism, and ensure that we are tracking the correct addresses, even though they might not be holding any UniETH from an on-chain perspective, but in reality they are still holding it because they've just locked it away on this platform. And that can be very, very tricky, especially when and this is a good problem to have, when you have dozens and dozens of partners wanting to integrate your token, sometimes even without your knowledge, which there's nothing wrong with that, but it just means that we have to keep on top of all of this and make sure that we're tracking everything everywhere. And our devs only have 24 hours in a day. As much as I wish they had more, they only have 24 hours in a day, and at some point they do need to sleep, they do need to eat. And so it's I continue to be amazed by the work that they do, and hats off to our product team, because it's absolutely incredible. My job is essentially to make their life miserable by saying, hey, we've got another integration, we've got another partnership coming in, and we need it by yesterday. And so that's the second really big challenge. And then the last one is around liquidity management and working with these partners to ensure the integrations are sustainable. There's no point launching a DEX or launching a Pendle Vault or a Pendle Pool or anything like that when the liquidity in those are so low that anybody who goes in there is going to increase their risk in an unrealistic manner. And this is one of the things we often work with our LPs and VCs on, is making sure that when we set up these new integrations and new use cases for the token, that we do it in a very low risk manner. And again, going back to that mindset of our focus is the institutional clients, that low risk is much lower than your retail investor or your degen, who can be like, who cares? I'll just put a bit of my portfolio in there and just see what happens. Whereas with institutional investors, they've got their board, they've got their investor base that they need to provide answers to if something goes wrong. And so we are very, very, very strict as far as how we develop out these integrations and provide liquidity and manage all of that to ensure nothing goes wrong. And at this point in time, we have not had a single issue. We haven't had any sort of depegs. With UniETH, we launched with withdrawals live from day zero, which is something most of the other LRTs didn't do. Almost all of them didn't do that. I'm not sure why. But again, because we have that experience, we have that knowledge, we had no issues with that. We didn't worry about if we have withdrawals live, people are going to just withdraw and go somewhere else. We believed in our product. We knew it the way it was built. And so we were happy. We were like, well, if they want to leave, it's not our money anyway. We need to make sure that they can do with it as they will. And that was a critical decision for us.
And earlier you mentioned, working with Optimism, with grants and Arbitrum is obviously how we were connected. Actually, I don't think people know that, but we were connected via the Arbitrum Foundation. So talk to us a little bit about like if there are a lot of builders and founders out there that are looking at grants and are like, how do you even get involved in that? Like, I think you mentioned Optimism approached you guys, but talk to us a little bit about like the grant process.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've done a few different grants with Polkadot, with Arbitrum, Optimism, and Binance Chain, etc. And they're all different, but they're all the same at the same time. And they're all different in that the requirements for or the eligibility requirements can vary greatly, and the requirements for how the grants to be used, the KPIs, the tracking, the reporting mechanisms are all they vary greatly. But at the end of the day, it all comes back to how can you provide value back into the ecosystem? How can you grow the TVL or the user base or the on-chain activity? Those are the three essentially metrics that everything comes back to. And just to give you an example, one of the things that I know that there are a lot of grants available for anybody who's listening, if you can build out a dashboard that is simple, easy, and user-friendly, I know a lot of foundation teams will be very interested in something like that, because that makes it much easier for the general populace to kind of understand the on-chain activity, understand what's going on there. And if they understand that, they're more likely to be using that chain versus one where there's a lot of opaqueness and difficulty in knowing what's going on. But essentially, I'll just add this as well. But essentially, with the grants, there's an application, there's a review, and then there's some sort of community voting or on-chain governance process. That's generally how it works, whether it's with a council, like a community elected council, with a DAO, or just a public forum or something like that. And so being able to know your product and the value you provide to the ecosystem is important, but also being involved in the ecosystem, having people know you, where you're not just, hang on, who is this guy? Who's this team? We've never heard of them. Are they just a money grab, etc.? If you can show that you're there for the community, that will go a very, very long way. So that's probably the other thing that I'd mention is get involved even before the grant application is in. Talk to people in the council, talk to the DAO, talk to the community, find out what they want, what they need, get those people on your side, and that will go a long way.
Yeah, and it's kind of like applying for a job, right, guys? I've written some grant applications for other companies in the past. It's like the person that knows the recruiter is going to have a lot easier time than the person that just came out of like the ether and they're like, who is this person even? Because then you have to convince them you're a real person. You're not just going to scam them.
Absolutely.
I'm very interested in this idea that you just mentioned because like I'm always looking for a problem to build on in the space about having a dashboard. So in my mind, there's like Grow the Pie. There is DeFi Llama. Dune, I don't really use at all, but I know it exists. So talk to us a little bit about like, because we like these startup ideas. What kind of dashboard do you think needs to exist?
I mean, just straight off the bat, going into the liquid staked and liquid restaked space. If anybody is building some sort of dashboard that allows users to, one, be able to compare and understand the liquid restaked ecosystem for any particular chain as a whole. So you've got all of these different LRT protocols. This is their TVL. This is their on-chain activity. Doing that in an unbiased manner is going to be really important. But then being able to integrate that with DeFi projects and DeFi partners in the sense that, okay, what can I do with my assets? And this is a big challenge that all of us in the DeFi space have. And that is that ability for users to understand an end-to-end strategy. So yes, people know about Bedrock, people know about Lombard, EtherFi, Swell, etc. But and this is even people who work in the space, if you were to say, okay, what's the best strategy to earn the most yield? Nobody will be able to answer that off the bat. Nobody will be able to say, okay, what you need to do is you need to get your wrapped Bitcoin, put it on Bedrock, then take that Uni BTC, put it on EigenLayer, you'll get this particular asset, then put that on Pendle, then use the PT on Pendle, in a lending borrowing to borrow more wrapped Bitcoin, loop that 3 times, and then it's just, I can say that because I work with Bedrock, and this is one of the questions that I get a lot of the time when I'm working with partners and foundation teams. But having that ability to see that end-to-end journey is going to be really critical if we're going to really take this to the next level for the wider populace and the general public. I think that's a real big flaw in the LRT and LST space, is that visibility and transparency across the board.
Yeah, I would say when I used to work at BlackRock on Aladdin, I forget the amount of assets they have. I think when I left, it was about $20 trillion in the Aladdin platform. But one of the biggest things was, one, portfolio construction, and two, managing your risk across all things, because in this space and in finance in general, there's base asset, right? And then there's derivatives, and then there's derivatives that play off those derivatives, and then it gets a little nutty, as people have seen. So if anyone can build that, they will be a very wealthy person. So let's talk real quick, because you've been very generous with your time. Talk to us a little bit about any exciting announcements you guys have coming up, or anything that people can look forward to from you guys.
Yep. Well, probably the first one that comes to mind is, as of last night, we have hit our first milestone with UniBDC after our first cap. So we had a cap of 400 Bitcoin, where we essentially didn't allow more than 400 Bitcoin to be staked on Bedrock. It was quite exclusive there. And the reason for that is because Babylon had their own cap of 1,000 Bitcoin to be delegated on their platform in their first mainnet launch phase. And there were a number of different providers, not only us, that were going to be running operators and getting delegations. And I am proud to say that Bedrock's operator, which is the RockX one, received, not only did they receive the most, but they essentially received double the amount of delegated Bitcoin compared to any other operator on Babylon. Which ended up meaning that we held 30% of the entire Babylon Bitcoin delegation, which was really exciting to see that trust and that engagement from the community there. But what that also meant was we wanted to ensure that the yield that was provided to our Bitcoin investors was going to be as high as possible. And there's no point accepting 3,000 Bitcoin, but only being able to delegate 200 of that or 300 of that on Babylon, which essentially means that you're washing down the yield for everybody by 10 times, because only 10% of that is actually earning any yield. And so do we then just say, okay, well, all that 90% is not going to earn any yield? Or do we spread it across the board and say, okay, you're only going to earn 10% of what you normally would? And that's essentially something that some of the other Bitcoin LRTs have done, is they've essentially washed it down. And we didn't want to do that. We wanted to ensure that our yield was as high as possible. So that's why we had that first cap in place. Now, with that, when we released, so after Babylon launched, we then released our second cap, well, rather not cap, but our second approach. And we've got 2 milestones and then the cap. And the first milestone was essentially receiving another 400 Bitcoin. And as of last night, we just hit that, which was very exciting to see. And we actually haven't launched the campaigns that we were planning on launching to hit that milestone. So that's kind of been in advance. So coming up, which is where we're going to probably hit milestone 2 and then hit our second cap, is where we've just launched on Binance Chain. And we're going to be launching some incentive programs and some campaigns there. As of next week, we'll be launching on Arbitrum, again with that Arbitrum grant. And with all the grants that we receive, 100% of that grant is going into the community as incentive for either holding or using UniBDC in some way, shape, or form. We do not receive any of that grant for our own benefit at all. We're also launching on BOB chain and on Zeta chain with their own campaigns there as well. So those are probably the 4 main ones. I would say if you're interested in Base and what Base is doing, do keep a close eye on Bedrock. that's about as much as I can say there as well. But we're working very, very closely with the Babylon team in relation to ensuring that as we grow, they grow, and vice versa. As they grow, we grow. So it's all as sustainable as possible. And at the end of the day, the more we provide value back to the community, the more trust we receive, the better reputation Bedrock has, and the more we'll grow, and vice versa with Babylon. There's exactly the same thing there. And so we're all in this together, and we're also working with others, which people would normally see them as competitors, but a lot of the other LRTs do not have access or exposure to Babylon, and we will be helping them with that. That's about as much as I'll say. But a lot of the other LRTs that you might be seeing around the place will probably end up having UniBTC involved in them in some way, shape, or form.
Some very exciting announcements, and some definitely things to come that can't be announced just yet. So talk to us about where people can listen for more and learn more about you guys. Is there a Twitter you'd like to call out? Is there a personal Twitter or website you want to call out for yourself?
Yep, for sure. So we've got the Bedrock's own Twitter account, and that one is Bedrock_DeFi. So that's where I would highly recommend following that. We've also got our own page, which is bedrock.technology. So do check that out. You'll generally see any new integrations or campaigns launching there first. If you wanted to reach me, my own Twitter is Gandalf_NFT. And then I would suggest just, I don't think you need to focus heavily on one LRT per se. But the one thing that I will say is do look into what is behind that LRT. It's very easy for anybody to create a wrapper and call it another LRT. We'll call it another Restake token, call it another protocol, but really look into what is behind that. Are they building any new tech? Are they innovating? Are they just creating a new contract that's opening you up to additional exposure and additional risk, which in some cases has unfortunately affected some people, some investors when they haven't really done that due diligence. So I'd say do check that out and do have a look at that. But I mean, the fact that we have foundation teams approaching us to work with us, Optimism, Binance, Arbitrum, IOTX, Zeta Chain, Mantle. I mean, I could keep going on, but the fact that those guys are wanting to work with us and seeing us as kind of that go-to for getting involved in LRTs, I think really says a lot as far as what we've been able to do in this space and what we continue to do.
Awesome. Well, everyone go get involved with Bedrock. Go definitely follow their accounts because it seems like there's some exciting alpha on the way. Well, thank you so much for joining us here. And everyone, let's get back to building the future of Web3.